What if I told you there's a secret indicator, overlooked by mainstream media, that can accurately predict the next recession? Is your portfolio truly prepared for what's coming? Stop relying on outdated forecasts and learn about the single, most powerful economic predictor you need to understand right now. The warning signs are flashing everywhere. Layoffs are quietly stacking up across industries, prices are still higher than they should be, and the mood of the economy feels more fragile than ever. People sense something is wrong, but the experts keep reassuring everyone that growth will continue, that inflation is cooling, and that we're heading for a soft landing. But what if those reassurances are nothing more than a false sense of calm? What if the storm is already brewing, and the Federal Reserve itself is ignoring the one signal that tells us exactly where the economy is headed? That's what we're talking about today. So leave a like and let's start. Every single time a recession hits, people look back and wonder, how did nobody see it coming? In 2008, banks collapsed and millions lost their jobs. Yet months before, the narrative was still about stability, about strength, about resilience. The truth is, recessions don't just appear out of thin air. They build slowly, piece by piece, like cracks in a dam. And if you know where to look, those cracks are visible long before the water breaks through. So why can't the Fed see them? Or maybe the better question is, why won't they admit what they see? And trust me, the reason is shocking, but we will see it later. For now, let's start with what we already know. Right now, job growth is weakening. Not long ago, official reports claimed hundreds of thousands of jobs were being created every month. But then the data was quietly revised downward. Suddenly, those supposed gains didn't look so strong. Companies are trimming staff, new hiring is slowing, and job growth is approaching levels we normally only see right before major downturns. If people can't find work, they can't spend. And if spending dries up, the economy slows down fast. Add to this the heavy burden of debt. The US government is spending far more than it collects, year after year, with no end in sight. Trillions are borrowed to keep the system moving, but every new dollar of borrowing comes with a cost. Interest payments alone are eating up nearly a quarter of all tax revenue, and soon it could be even more. Imagine working all week only to spend $1 out of every $4 you earn just to cover credit card interest. That's what America is doing with its debt. And eventually, lenders get nervous. But here's where things get even more dangerous. If creditors demand higher interest rates to lend to the US, the cost of borrowing explodes. The government borrows more to pay off old loans, but now at higher rates, creating a vicious cycle. More debt, more interest, more borrowing, and less trust. Now think about inflation. Officially, inflation has cooled, but go to the grocery store and you'll see the truth with your own eyes. Eggs, bread, milk, meat, all still far more expensive than just a few years ago. Housing costs are crushing families. Rent is swallowing paychecks. Healthcare feels like a luxury. The Fed may celebrate that inflation is no longer running at 9%, but what they don't admit is that prices never went back down. The damage is permanent. What used to cost $100 now costs $120, and it will never return to $100 again. Americans feel this every single day. Stagnant wages mean their paychecks aren't keeping up. They stretch their dollars thinner and thinner, cutting back on essentials, skipping vacations, delaying retirement. The middle class is being squeezed, and history tells us when that happens, recessions follow. So let's pause here. We've got weakening job growth, record debt, rising interest costs, stubbornly high prices, and consumers running out of steam. All of these are classic recession signals. But here's the mystery. The Fed acknowledges most of these risks, yet it insists the economy is fundamentally strong. They say the labour market is resilient, consumer demand is steady, and inflation is under control. But what if all of that is a distraction from the one true signal? Because there is one. A single economic indicator that has been more accurate than any jobs report, any inflation figure, any debt statistic. And this is the signal the Fed is ignoring. But before I reveal it, let's look at history. In the 1970s, America was hit with stagflation. Prices were rising, but growth was stagnant. Official numbers gave mixed signals. Politicians claimed the economy was stable, yet one financial measure warned that trouble was coming. Few paid attention. The result was years of economic pain. In the early 1990s, it happened again. Headlines focused on consumer confidence, manufacturing output, and unemployment. But beneath the surface, that same hidden measure was flashing red. And sure enough, a recession followed. And of course, before 2008, the signal was there again. Clear as day, but it was brushed aside. Pundits said the housing market was strong, that banks were healthy, that risks were contained. You know how that ended. Millions lost their homes, markets collapsed, and the world entered the worst downturn since the Great Depression. So what is this hidden signal that reveals the danger before it happens? It's not GDP, it's not inflation, it's not the unemployment rate. The critical signal the Fed is missing is the yield curve. Specifically, the inversion of long-term and short-term interest rates. Now, if that sounds complicated, let's make it very simple. Imagine you lend money to a friend. If you lend it for 1 week, you probably expect a small return. If you lend it for 10 years, you expect a bigger return because you're taking on more risk over a longer time. That's how lending normally works. Long-term loans have higher interest than short-term loans. But when the yield curve inverts, that relationship flips. Short-term rates become higher than long-term rates. In other words, investors believe the near future is riskier than the distant future. That's a massive red flag, because it signals investors expect the Fed will eventually have to cut rates to fight a recession. And here's the shocking part. Every single US recession in the last 50 years has been preceded by a yield curve inversion. Not most of them. Not some of them. Every single one. Right now, the yield curve is inverted again, and it has been inverted for one of the longest periods in history. That's the critical signal the Fed is missing, or refusing to acknowledge. Think about the implications. The Fed keeps raising and lowering interest rates based on inflation data and employment numbers. But those numbers lag. They tell us what happened months ago, not what's about to happen. The yield curve, on the other hand, is forward-looking. It reflects where markets believe the economy is headed, and right now that future looks grim. Let me give you another example. Before the dot-com crash in the early 2000s, the yield curve inverted. The Fed brushed it aside. A recession came anyway. Before the great financial crisis, the yield curve inverted again. Economists downplayed it, saying this time is different. But it wasn't. The financial system nearly collapsed, and now here we are again. The curve is inverted, yet the Fed keeps telling us everything is fine. Why would they ignore it? Maybe because admitting the truth would cause panic. Maybe because they believe they can manage the economy through sheer willpower. Or maybe because the Fed itself is trapped. Raising rates risks breaking the system, but cutting them risks reigniting inflation. So they choose to pretend the signal doesn't matter. But you can't argue with history, and history says an inverted yield curve is the most reliable predictor of recession we have. Think of it like this. Imagine you're driving at night. The weather forecast says clear skies, no danger. But as you drive, you notice your windshield wipers are working harder. Raindrops are hitting the glass. You flick on your high beams and see dark storm clouds ahead. Do you keep driving at full speed because the forecast told you everything was fine? Or do you trust your own eyes and prepare for the storm? That's the choice we face right now. The Fed says everything is under control, but the yield curve is screaming danger, and the longer it stays inverted, the worse the outcome tends to be. Past data shows that the deeper and longer the inversion, the harder the recession that follows. Right now we are deep in that inversion. This isn't a flicker of warning, it's a blaring siren. So what does this mean for you? It means the economy is not as stable as officials want you to believe. It means the risks of a major downturn are real, and they're growing. And it means ignoring this signal could be one of the most costly mistakes of your financial life. Think about your investments. Think about your job. Think about your savings. If a recession strikes, all of these will be tested. And history tells us that those who prepare early come out stronger. while those who wait for official confirmation suffer the most. The Fed may be missing this critical recession signal. But you don't have to. The yield curve doesn't lie, it's the hidden map of the economy's future. And right now that map is pointing straight toward a storm. So the question isn't whether the Fed is missing the signal. The real question is, are you? Because if you keep waiting for them to admit the truth, it might already be too late. So to stay always protected, you can subscribe to this channel and let me know your thoughts in the comments. See you soon. Just a reminder, I'm not a financial advisor. This video is for educational purposes only, and any results depend on your own decisions and actions.